always hard to trade guys like Drew and Kristaps, but there's been all the talk of like financial situations and aprons and luxury taxes. I'm curious how much the second apron penalties came into those two trades as well as luxury taxes, because you guys have been a second apron team for 2 years before this.
I mean, the second apron's why those trades happen. I think that those are pretty obvious.
Going into that second apron is not necessarily something that we're scared of. I think that there are rules around it that we needed to be very careful of with our injury history. The wrong person gets injured and very quickly you're into a scenario where that I never want to have to contemplate, and that's trade number 15.
Oh, nah, you definitely scared of that second apron if you obviously don't want to do the unthinkable, which would be trading Nikola Jokic, number 15. But there's a lot of teams who are really nervous about the second apron thing, man. And it wasn't like this. Obviously, the first and second apron was initiated in the 2023-24 season. Before that, if you were over the luxury tax apron, that's all that it really was. There wasn't a limit to how much you could spend. You could keep spending all the money you want as long as you were willing to pay the hefty tax penalties and other little things like not being able to use a mid-level exception. But outside of that, you were able to pretty much keep spending, having these huge contracts and teams, rosters full of this star player, that star player, and the NBA said, all right, enough of this now. So let's get into how this first and second apron changed the whole dynamic of the NBA for the future. We'll start at the basics and work our way up. The NBA has a soft salary cap for the 2025-26 season of approximately $156 million. Now, according to Hoops Hype, I'm not exactly sure how they do their calculations for team payrolls, but let's assume that this is legit. The only teams who are under this soft salary cap going into the 2025-26 season would be the Chicago Bulls, the Utah Jazz, and the Brooklyn Nets. Every other team is pretty much over it. Let's look at the Detroit Pistons, who are projected to be at a payroll of $166 million. They don't face any restrictions at all, not even tax penalties, and I'm going to slowly get into the caps as we keep going on in this video. But a team like the Pistons, if this is what they're at, then the only thing they can't do is sign a free agent outright. And if they're making a trade, the player contracts that they are getting can't be worth more than 125% of the original contract on the players that the Detroit Pistons will be trading themselves in order to get the other players back. Basically, that's one very simple example of how a team over this salary cap can still make roster moves even if they are restricted with the money. Now, you also have trade exceptions. For example, let's stick with the Pistons here. If they were to make a move and they traded a player away whose contract is worth $20 million and the player they are receiving, his contract is worth about $50 million, if you take the difference between those two, then the Pistons would be rewarded a $5 million trade exception. And what ends up happening is if they use this within the year of that trade that happened, then they could use this trade exception along with only minimal contracts and let's say draft picks to get another player that is worth that $5 million exception. In other words, they could eat that contract even though they're over the salary cap. Again, just another example of how you can still go over it to make roster moves. I said just a while ago, going back to free agency, that a team wouldn't be able to sign a free agent outright if they're over the cap. However, you have what you call the mid-level exception, and there's two different kinds. There's one where they can sign a free agent for $12 million annually up to 4 years under this mid-level exception, or you have another one where it's $5 million annually up to 3 years. But moving along, let's get into bird rights, which was a huge factor, especially in the past, how teams were able to keep all their star players while going over the salary cap. Alright, first of all, you have something called non-bird rights, which is if there's a player and he was on your team for at least 1 year, you could sign him back up to 120% of his previous salary, even if it means you are over the salary cap. Alright, then you have early bird rights, which is if you had a player who played for 2 years, you could sign him up to 120% of the league average or 175% of his previous salary and go over the cap. And finally, you have full bird rights, which is if a player played at least 3 years in a row, you can sign him up to a maximum salary and a 5-year contract, even if you go over the salary cap. We've covered pretty much the basics that I wanted to outline before I move forward with the whole cap, because it doesn't stop at this 156 soft part that I was talking about. Moving along, if you are past $170 million in player contracts, then you have crossed what is called the luxury tax line. At this point, the further you increase your salary from this $170 million line is the more penalties and taxes that you have to pay. Also, you lose what is called your biannual exception. That was something also tied into free agency. Basically, every 2 years, a team has an exception where they can sign a free agent for a maximum contract up to 2 years worth about $5 million. And this is another exception that you could use to get around cap restrictions. Let's keep going. At about $188 million of salaries, this is what you call the luxury tax apron. If you go over this, now you lose one of your mid-level exceptions. Remember, I explained this earlier, how you have two. One that's about $12 million a year for 4 years, and a second one that is about $5 million for 3 years each annually. So if you pass this tax apron of $188 million, you lose that exception, the first one, the bigger one, about $12 million. You still have the smaller one. You can still use your bird rights, and you can only sign and trade players if you're giving them away. So if somebody's trying to send you a player themselves to your team, you cannot do that anymore. You can only sign and trade players away that is already on your roster. Now we have what is called the first apron, which is at about $196 million. This is where the restrictions get even more tight. You lose all of your mid-level exceptions. You're still not allowed to sign and trade to receive a player. You can't also match contracts in order to get a bigger one. What I mean is, if there's a $50 million guy out there, and that's what his contract is annually, you can't take two other contracts worth $25 million a year and add them together in order to get the bigger contract that the player is on. You literally have to match each contract individually with another one. You also lose the ability to use any trade exceptions that you have if you cross this first apron of $196 million. You are also prohibited from using cash in trades as well. Finally, we reached what is called the second apron, also known as the hard cap, which is $208 million. You go anything past it, you're done. The only thing you could do to sign players back to ignore it is a veteran minimum of about $1 million. Outside of that, even if you have the bird rights on a player, if that contract you signed them to pushes you over the hard cap, nope, you can't do it. You end up losing that superstar player who's asking for a lot of money. Okay, and pretty much all the other restrictions that I mentioned is still in play, but you also have some new ones, like the ability for you to match a trade where it's up to 125% of the contract that you're giving out, and you could take in a little bit more salary. No, you can't do that, because once again, this is a hard cap. You can't pass this number. On top of this, teams aren't allowed to trade future picks that are 7 years out. They aren't allowed to sign buyout players. So when we're looking at the Oklahoma City Thunder, who gave contract extensions of $285 million, 4 years for Gilgeous-Alexander, a $287 million contract, 5 years for Jalen Williams, and Chet Holmgren with $250 million over 5 years. When these contracts kick in for these guys, the Oklahoma City Thunder will be paying about $178 million a year just for these three players alone. That's very close to the luxury tax apron of $188 million, and not too far off from the first apron itself, which is at about $196 million, where the restrictions really start to kick in. It's going to be very hard to fill in depth around these three guys. Once these contracts come into play, we'll see what the future holds for the Thunder. I'm going to leave things right here. Let me know how you feel about the explanation. If there's anything else that you think I'm missing that needs some more context, leave it in the comment section. If you have any questions, let me know. You can also look at all the other teams' payroll and see where they're at when it comes to this cap, and see which teams maybe don't have that great of a team, but they're still spending a lot of money. There's a number of those teams, and that's probably a whole nother video in itself. Like I said, though, hit me up in the comment section. Like, share, and subscribe. Salute for listening. Peace.
Now here's what's behind the curtain, and I want all my friends, the 29 GMs, to close their eyes. All 15 players on this roster are under contract for next season. They've got 2 firsts in June. They've got the Heat first and pick 15. They've got a 24th pick. This Oklahoma City team is not going anywhere. I mean, I know we talk about windows and how long does this have it.
Right.